Late spring breathed soft warmth over the outer suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. Gentle night breezes swept across Sterling's private vineyard, carrying faint, mellow aromas of ripe white peaches and aged oak wine casks. Rows of grapevines stretched across acres of rolling hills, their leaves woven into layered blankets of violet and burnished gold beneath the sinking sunset. Tonight hosted the city's most prestigious medical charity gala. Every single detail, venue layout, guest traffic routes, custom food and wine pairings, and the full sequence of charity auctions had been conceptualized, planned, and fully executed single-handedly by Ella Reed. At 32, Ella had built her event planning studio entirely from scratch, with no wealthy family connections or inherited resources to fall back on. Every client partnership, every high society booking she'd secured was earned through endless late nights refining event blueprints and constant on-site crisis management to iron out every tiny oversight. The estate's grand ballroom featured 12-foot vaulted ceilings draped with hand-blown crystal chandeliers that cast soft, diffused golden light. Long banquet tables were covered with custom cream hand-woven linen tablecloths, each place setting laid out with hand-thrown bone china dinnerware and polished custom silver flatware. Hundreds of local entrepreneurs, old money-landed families, and community philanthropists filed into the venue in orderly streams. Ella wore a streamlined tailored gray two-piece suit matched with low nude block heels, her chestnut hair secured in a neat low bun. One hand clutched a thick-bound event schedule binder, and she shuttled nonstop between the ballroom, open-air viewing terrace, and back-of-house catering kitchen, ready to triage any last-minute mishaps the moment they arose. She had long grown accustomed to grueling, high-pressure work schedules, yet a heavy, unshakable sense of foreboding lingered deep in her chest all day long. Earlier that morning, her mother Martha had held her captive on a 30-minute phone call, shifting back and forth between cloying pleas and sharp accusations, all circling a single unyielding demand: $70,000 in operating capital for Braden's brand-new used car dealership venture. To Martha, Ella's business revenue naturally belonged to her son by birthright, as if Ella had no legitimate claim to the money she'd earned through years of toil. Ella had tried to reason with her gently over the phone, explaining that every dollar of her firm's liquid operating capital had already been prepaid as non-refundable deposits for gala floral installations, live band retainers, and auction consignment fees. Her personal checking account only held a small emergency reserve fund meant exclusively for unexpected venue surcharges, with no large lump sum of free cash available to hand over on demand. The second those reasonable words left her mouth, Martha's tone curdled into bitter condemnation. She called Ella cold and ungrateful, claiming her daughter cared only about fancy parties and had abandoned the family that raised her. Her father Lyle took the phone next, leaning on decades of tuition costs for Ella's design schooling as emotional leverage, repeating the worn mantra that Ella now owed the family full repayment for their early sacrifices. The call left Ella distracted and anxious for hours afterward. She knew her parents would never drop the monetary demand easily, no matter how thoroughly she laid out her tight cash flow limitations. Braden had hopped from one dead-end job to another since high school, launching 5 half-baked startup ventures that all collapsed within weeks or months. Every time his amateur business schemes crashed and burned, he immediately ran to their parents to vent frustration, and Martha and Lyle would instantly shift the full financial burden over to Ella via relentless guilt-tripping. Over the past 5 years, Ella had shelled out nearly $90,000 of her personal savings to bail him out of self-inflicted losses, and not a single cent had ever been repaid to her. All her sacrifices only yielded fresh, ever-growing monetary demands and constant unfair criticism from her blood relatives. Sure enough, less than 1 hour after the gala reception opened, loud, disruptive shouting echoed from the ballroom's side entry doors. Ella glanced up from coordinating auction displays and spotted Martha and Lyle dragging Braden past uniformed security staff, who attempted to block their unauthorized entry. Braden slouched lazily between the two elders, wearing a cheap faded graphic cotton tee and denim jeans stained with motor oil, a stark, jarring contrast against the formal evening gowns and custom-tailored suits worn by every other attendee. No trace of embarrassment crossed his face. Instead, he carried an air of unearned, absolute entitlement as the 3 family members marched straight toward the service counter where Ella stood working. Martha closed the distance in 2 quick strides and snatched Ella's wrist in a tight, painful grip, deliberately raising her speaking volume to draw curious stares from nearby guests and stage a public scene to pressure her daughter into compliance. "Don't beat around the bush with me tonight, Ella. That $70,000 is non-negotiable startup funding for Braden's car lot. If we don't come up with this money right now, he'll never get his business off the ground. How can you stand by and watch your own flesh and blood spiral into ruin out of pure selfishness?" Lyle stepped to Martha's side, furrowing his brow to manufacture a pained, heartbroken expression meant to tug at onlookers' sympathies. "We sacrificed every spare dollar and countless hours raising you properly. You pull in steady good money planning elite events now. It's only natural you lend a hand to your own family in their hour of need. Don't turn into one of those shallow outsiders who forget their roots the second they taste minor success." Braden leaned his hip against the catering counter, twisting a crystal champagne glass between his fingertips with bored, careless indifference, his tone casual as if asking for pocket change rather than tens of thousands in business funding. "This amounts nothing big for you, sis. Once the dealership turns consistent profit, I'll pay you back double. You're just bitter you don't want to see me get ahead and build something for myself." Sharp, throbbing pain shot through Ella's wrist beneath Martha's crushing grasp. Her peripheral vision caught multiple well-known local business owners pausing their conversations to stare at the uncomfortable family spectacle unfolding in front of them, and hot embarrassment flooded her chest. If a full-blown, screaming argument erupted at the charity gala she'd spent months designing, word would spread fast through Charlotte's elite social circles, instantly tanking her studio's hard-earned professional reputation and wiping out every potential new client lead she cultivated over years of networking. She bit back the flood of hurt, angry words swelling in her throat, forced her voice down to a restrained murmur, and guided the 3 of them down a quiet, narrow side hallway cut off from the main banquet crowd to contain the conflict before it spiraled further out of control. "Mom, Dad, listen to me carefully and honestly. Every drop of my studio's available cash flow has been pre-allocated to upfront gala expenses, floral installations, live band retainers, auction item security deposits, and hourly payroll for temporary catering staff. My personal account only holds a tiny emergency buffer meant solely for unexpected venue fees. There's no large lump sum I can withdraw instantly for Braden's business. Every venture he launches lacks structured budgeting, risk assessment, or long-term profit plans, and I cannot keep pouring my personal savings into endless financial sinkholes with zero return." Martha's eyes instantly welled with manufactured, performative tears, cranking up her voice to attract passing waitstaff and stray guests to witness her staged victimhood. "How did we raise a daughter with such a cold, unfeeling heart? Your brother's entire future hangs on this funding, and you'd stand idly by and let him fail. Every neighbor, distant relative, and church acquaintance will whisper behind our backs about how you abandoned your own blood for trivial party work." Lyle piled on more layered emotional manipulation, weaving decades of shared family history to trap Ella in manufactured guilt. Braden dropped out of high school early to pick up part-time hourly shifts and help cover household grocery bills back when you were attending design college. It's only fair you repay that sacrifice now by funding his shot at a stable career. Braden immediately joined their coordinated verbal attack, adding more exaggerated grievances to amplify the pressure on Ella. The 3 formed a tight circle around her, blocking any path of escape, flooding her ears with overlapping accusations and demands. Several banquet servers paused their tray deliveries to linger and watch the tense confrontation unfold, and burning shame crawled up Ella's cheeks. No matter how logically she laid out her financial constraints and Braden's consistent pattern of reckless mismanagement, her parents had already locked themselves into an unshakable biased narrative. Ella's success existed solely to fund Braden's every fleeting whim, and any refusal to surrender large amounts of cash made her a cruel, ungrateful daughter. A long beat of suffocating silence fell over the narrow corridor as Ella weighed her limited options, before offering a fragile compromise steeped in exhaustion. "I can lend $5,000 interest-free next month, one single payment only. After this one time, I will not provide any additional cash to cover business losses or operating costs for his dealership." This minimal compromise ignited Martha's explosive anger instantly. She ripped her hand free from Ella's arm with a sharp jerk, raising her voice to a shrill shout that echoed down the empty hallway, screaming that $5,000 did not even amount to a tiny fraction of the lot's required down payment, accusing Ella of intentionally sabotaging Braden's only viable career opportunity out of petty resentment. The 3 family members surrounded her, bombarding her with non-stop recriminations and monetary requests, fully ignoring her professional responsibilities and the critical gala timeline hanging over her head. Ella could not afford to waste more precious pre-auction prep time trapped in this circular, unresolvable argument. She pulled a sealed envelope of petty cash emergency funds out of her crossbody handbag and pressed it into Martha's palm, promising to revisit the financial conversation once the gala concluded for the night. She forced her rigid, heavy shoulders back into the main ballroom, shoving all bottled grief and frustration deep beneath a composed professional mask to resume coordinating the live auction's final rehearsal run-through. The bitter, heavy weight of their verbal abuse lingered thick in her chest long after the confrontation ended, and her gaze drifted repeatedly toward the large open viewing terrace at the vineyard's rear. She resolved to slip away for 10 minutes once the silent auction wrapped to breathe unpressured fresh air and escape the suffocating emotional weight her family's demands placed on her shoulders. At that exact same moment, the vineyard's owner Hudson Sterling found himself trapped at the ballroom's central lounge area, encircled by a dense crowd of blood relatives, caught in a parallel, inescapable social predicament. 40 years old, with a tall, sturdy frame and calm, reserved facial features, Hudson owned a nationwide chain of 12 premium luxury vineyards scattered across the American Southeast. He controlled a multi-generational, irrevocable family trust holding assets valued in the hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars, and a critical clause buried deep within the trust's founding legal paperwork created a massive loophole every single one of his siblings, aunts, uncles, and assorted cousins had fixated on for years. As long as Hudson remained legally unmarried, all extended family members possessed the right to submit annual formal petitions requesting partial disbursements of yearly operating profit revenue. Every blood relative who'd purchased gala tickets that night had arrived with a pre-planned agenda. They surrounded Hudson the second he stepped away from his private table, alternating between persistent pressure for him to settle down with a spouse and relentless demands to split the trust's accumulated wealth evenly among all kin. His eldest sister Claire took the lead, her lips stretched into a hollow, performative warm smile masking cold, calculating greed beneath every word she spoke. You've hit 40 and remain fully unattached, Hudson. All that trust profit sits idle year after year with no one to utilize it. Why don't we split chunks of annual revenue out to all of us younger family members to launch our own investment portfolios? We could manage those funds far more productively than letting them gather dust in dormant bank accounts. Tiffany, his second sister, followed close on Claire's heels, wrapping every monetary request in manufactured sorrow over their late parents' unfulfilled wishes, weaponizing familial sentiment to justify her grab at wealth. Mom and Dad dreamed of seeing you build a stable family your entire life. You keep delaying marriage indefinitely, and the whole clan worries endlessly over your choices. If you'd simply find a wife soon, we could formalize an equitable asset division plan so every household can upgrade their standard of living significantly. A chorus of assorted aunts, uncles, and adult cousins chimed in one after another, each voicing their own specific financial asks. One male cousin begged for large cash transfers to cover elite private academy tuition fees for his adolescent children. A middle-aged aunt lobbied for capital to purchase a lakefront vacation condo. A distant paternal uncle pushed for partial ownership rights to one of Hudson's smaller satellite vineyards. Every single relative's eyes locked firmly on Hudson's vast fortune, with zero genuine concern for his personal happiness or mental well-being underlying their requests. Hudson had endured this exact cycle of hollow, self-serving family harassment for decades, and years of repetitive identical pleas had left him emotionally numb, drained, and endlessly irritated. The constant stream of greedy chatter thrummed behind his temples, triggering a dull, persistent headache. He offered vague, non-committal polite small talk to pacify the crowd long enough to manufacture a clean escape route, murmuring a quick excuse about stepping outside for fresh air before slipping past the ring of relatives toward floor-to-ceiling glass, sliding doors, leading out onto the cedar-planked viewing terrace. Once he stepped outside, Cool, vine-scented wind washed over his face, instantly drowning out all the noisy, self-interested conversations echoing inside the ballroom behind him. The terrace boasted unobstructed panoramic views stretching for miles, covering orderly rows of grapevines and thick bands of distant pine woodland rolling across the valley floor. Hudson leaned both forearms against ornate wrought-iron safety railings, his fingers rubbing the printed business card of his long-standing estate trust attorney tucked into the inner pocket of his custom wool suit jacket. For years, a quiet, unspoken solution had lingered in the back of his mind to end the nonstop familial harassment. Hire a woman willing to act as his nominal, event-only wife for all high-society family gatherings. A publicly acknowledged legal spouse would permanently seal the trust's loophole his relatives exploited annually to petition for profit shares. Yet every wealthy socialite or aspiring social climber he'd encountered at prior elite functions immediately fixated on his estate and trust fortune the second they learned his surname. He had no desire to strike a deal with someone whose sole motivation was accessing his generational wealth, until he spotted Ella standing alone at the terrace's far railing. Hudson had observed the full confrontation between Ella and her family from the shadowed corridor archway minutes earlier. He'd watched Martha and Lyle bully and pressure Ella for massive sums of money while Braden stood by with unearned entitlement, and instantly recognized that this quiet, composed woman carried the exact same lifelong burden of being treated as an endless disposable resource by blood relatives that he himself endured. A clear, fully formed idea took shape in his mind as he began walking slowly across the terrace to approach her and lay out his temporary employment proposal. The sun had fully sunk below the treeline that ringed the woodlands, streaking the sky overhead with soft gradients of peach and pale coral. Strings of warm fairy lights strung along the terrace's wooden beams flickered on automatically as dusk settled. Gentle golden light draped over Ella's shoulders as she stood alone, deliberately putting distance between herself and the noisy chaos of the ballroom. Her mind replayed every sharp accusation hurled at her by her parents and brother just minutes ago, and dozens of painful childhood memories came flooding back in an unbroken stream. When Braden had begged for a brand-new video game console as a kid, her parents had emptied the piggy bank where she'd stashed 6 months' worth of chore pocket money to buy it for him without a second thought. Back in high school, the full scholarship she'd won for graphic design was seized outright to pay off Braden's unpaid arcade debts. Her very first paycheck after graduating design school was confiscated by her folks to cover his driving school fees. 5 years prior, Braden's bubble tea shop folded from reckless mismanagement, and Martha and Lyle had rushed over to her apartment late at night, pressuring her to max out 2 credit cards to cover all the shop's outstanding bills. Time and time again, Ella had backed down and compromised, yet she never received a single word of gratitude in return. Instead, their demands only grew more outrageous each time, as if every dollar she earned through hard labor existed solely to fund her idle, unambitious brother's fleeting whims. Ella knew deep down that endless compromise would only leave her drained and exploited for the rest of her life. Still, invisible chains woven from familial expectation held her captive. To every neighbor, church acquaintance, and distant relative within their small suburban circle, refusing to support one sibling marked a person as cold and heartless. Burdened by the constant weight of public judgment, she never dared to cut ties completely, only offering incremental concessions and swallowing all her sorrows in private. She gazed out over the endless rows of grapevines stretching into the distance, drawing a slow, deep breath to steady the tangled negative emotions churning inside her chest. She was so wrapped up in her own thoughts that she did not notice Hudson standing a short distance away, quietly watching her. Hudson took slow, measured steps forward, keeping a polite gap between them so he would not startle her out of her reverie. He waited until she turned her head and spotted his silhouette before speaking, his voice a low, steady baritone honed from decades of boardroom negotiations and high society gatherings. "I don't mean to intrude on your quiet moment. I witnessed the argument with your family in the hallway a little while back. If you'd rather have complete solitude, I'll move to the other end of the terrace at once." Ella jolted slightly out of her thoughts, quickly smoothing the raw hurt out of her features. She gave him a soft, restrained nod, maintaining the polished, professional poise she kept at all work events. "It's nothing important, just messy family business." Hudson leaned against the metal balustrade beside her, gesturing toward the sprawling vineyard stretching out before them to open casual small talk first, rather than jumping straight into his unusual request. He wanted to ease her wariness before laying out his proposal. This entire charity gala was planned and executed by you alone. I've attended countless upscale galas across the Southeast, yet the attention to detail and smooth flow you've crafted far surpasses every local event planner I've worked with before. Unexpected, sincere praise loosened the tight tension coiled in Ella's shoulders. She nodded simply, briefly touching on the hardships of running a business with no family financial backing, never over-dramatizing her struggles, only stating objective truths about the pressure of her line of work. I built this studio from the ground up with no connections or startup support. I have to supervise every single part of every event myself. One tiny oversight can ruin years of built-up client trust, so I can never afford to slack off. Hudson listened intently, picking up every trace of suppressed weariness hidden beneath her calm tone. Combined with the ugly family confrontation he just witnessed, he fully understood the cycle of lifelong exploitation she'd endured at the hands of her blood relatives. He then eased into stating what he needed from her. I have a temporary professional arrangement to propose. The pay will be substantial. For the full duration of tonight's gala, you would act as my legal wife in the eyes of all attending family members, staying by my side to block their nonstop badgering about marriage and their attempts to split up my family trust assets. A flicker of surprise crossed Ella's face. She stayed silent, waiting for him to lay out all the full terms before voicing any agreement or refusal. Hudson laid out every clause with crystal clarity, following the standard format of formal private service contracts widely used across the United States. $15,000 will be paid to you in full the moment this gala concludes. This agreement is only valid for tonight. There will be no required follow-up appearances, no after-hours contact, and no interference with your event studio or personal private life. All you need to do is stand beside me during socializing and give brief, straightforward replies to their questions. If any of my relatives speak rudely or harass you, I will step in immediately to shield you. You won't be forced to endure unkind words alone. He laid his core motive bare without softening the unflattering truth about his greedy kin. Every sister, brother, aunt, uncle, and cousin of mine fixates on the wealth held within the family trust. As long as I remain unmarried, they hold a legal loophole to submit yearly applications for a share of the annual operating profits. If the public sees me with a confirmed spouse, they lose all reasonable grounds to pester me for asset divisions. I've met countless people who instantly fawn over me once they learn how much wealth I own, but the calm resolve you showed when your family pressed you for money tells me you have no desire to chase fortunes you haven't earned yourself. You're the only suitable candidate I've found. $15,000 would cover every outstanding invoice for floral crews, musicians, and auction supplies in one lump sum, instantly lifting the crippling cash flow pressure weighing on Ella's small business. The offer was undeniably tempting, yet a deep aversion stirred within her heart. All her life, she had been reduced to a human ATM for her parents' and brother's reckless spending. Now this billionaire sought to rent her identity as a social buffer for his own messy family conflicts. The thought of playing a fake spouse purely in exchange for cash struck her as another transaction that turned her into a disposable tool, and she hesitated, lost in quiet contemplation. Hudson saw her hesitation written plainly on her face, yet he did not rush her for an immediate answer. A soft breeze stirred their clothing, and faint strains of orchestral music drifted over from the distant ballroom, filling the terrace with quiet, unhurried calm. He gave her all the time she needed to weigh her choices, knowing pushing her would only breed resentment. He did not want someone cooperating out of desperate financial panic. He needed a woman who agreed of her own free will. Ella lowered her gaze, sorting the conflicting thoughts swirling through her mind. On one hand, the large payout could erase every financial headache she was facing right now. On the other hand, taking the role meant surrendering her authentic self to play a fabricated character, reduced to a prop to resolve a stranger's family drama. She lifted her head and met Hudson's gaze, her expression steady, free from flattery or anger. She planned to speak her unvarnished truth, laying bare the self-serving logic behind his offer and explaining why she could not simply submit to his monetary lure. Warm fairy lights spilled soft amber over Ella's calm, composed features. She held Hudson's gaze steady and unwavering, her tone flat, even, stripped of sharp accusations or shrill outbursts. Every word landed with quiet precision, laying bare the transactional self-interest woven into his temporary spouse offer, and the unvarnished truth left the billionaire, who'd spent 40 years surrounded by people eager to curry favor with his fortune, completely lost for words. "Sir, I fully grasp how substantial this payout would be, and how easily it could erase every cash flow crisis weighing on my business, yet I cannot accept this one-night contract." Hudson's dark brows lifted in quiet surprise. In decades of navigating elite Southern social circles, he'd never once met a man or woman who turned down an instant $15,000 lump sum just to avoid playing a pretend spouse. Curiosity softened his faint confusion as he pressed gently, no trace of arrogance in his voice. "Might I ask what's holding you back? If you feel the compensation isn't commensurate with your time and emotional strain, I'll raise the full payout to $20,000 USD and strip every unnecessary social obligation from the agreement to lighten your burden." Ella shook her head once, unmoved by the promise of more money. She laid out her core boundaries in clear, measured logic, peeling back the exploitative core of his proposal layer by layer. "What you're offering is a generous paycheck to rent a disposable human buffer. You need a temporary social prop to absorb all the friction your money-hungry relatives stir up over the family trust and your single status. You don't seek an equal conversational partner to share genuine evening company with. You want a scripted fake wife whose every word, every public demeanor exists solely to resolve your personal family mess. For the entire gala, I'd be reduced to a performance piece built around your troubles, stripped of my own authentic identity." She paused, drawing on 32 years of being drained by her birth family to articulate the visceral revulsion coiled in her chest. There was no venom in her delivery, only quiet, hard-earned self-respect. "I've spent my whole life cast as a human ATM by my parents and brother. Everyone around me treated my labor, savings, and peace of mind as an unlimited resource to drain without a shred of gratitude. It took me years to carve firm personal boundaries to break that cycle of one-sided sacrifice. I will not volunteer to slip back into that same disposable role for a cash reward, acting out a fake marriage to entertain a crowd of calculating strangers who only care about your fortune. Money can purchase scheduled hours and manual labor, but it cannot buy willing emotional surrender. Nor should large sums of cash be used to manufacture a false intimate bond as a lazy workaround for your rift with your bloodkin. Your relative's greed is a conflict between you and your family, not a burden to outsource to a stranger for a price. That dynamic strikes me fundamentally unfair." Her plain, unembellished observation cut straight through the decades of self-centered thinking Hudson had carried without a second thought. Every staff member, social acquaintance, and distant relative he'd ever crossed paths with catered blindly to every quiet wish he held, quick to compromise their own needs to please him. No one had ever stood before him as an equal to name his unexamined self-interest so plainly. Hudson froze, his fingers releasing the metal terrace railing he'd been gripping tight. A flood of sober self-reflection washed over him. He'd viewed the $15,000 payout as more than fair reciprocity for a few hours of mild small talk, yet he'd never paused to step into Ella's shoes and calculate the heavy mental toll of performing a fabricated marital identity for hundreds of judgmental, wealthy onlookers. His entire proposal had been framed around his own desperate need for relief, with zero consideration of her lifelong trauma from familial exploitation. A long stretch of soft wind passed over the vine-lined terrace as he fell silent, processing the weight of his oversight. When he spoke again, the smooth, authoritative lilt he wielded in boardrooms vanished, replaced with quiet, sincere remorse. "I approach this all from my own suffering alone, with no thought to how dehumanizing this role might feel for you. I offer my genuine apologies for pitching such a one-sided transaction without accounting for the emotional weight a fake public identity would place on your shoulders." Ella nodded faintly, gracious yet unbudging on her limits. "I understand how exhausting the nonstop harassment from your family must be, but every person has lines they refuse to cross, no matter the dollar amount attached." Hudson did not abandon the offer entirely. Instead, he restructured the heart of the bargain, shifting his primary incentive from pure cash to a permanent legal solution that targeted the lifelong financial abuse Ella endured at the hands of her parents and brother. I will rewrite all the terms of our verbal agreement. The original $15,000 full gala payout remains guaranteed, dispersed the moment the night wraps. On top of that, I will retain a top-tier North Carolina domestic family attorney at my sole expense. You will owe 0 legal fees of any kind. The legal team will compile every bank transfer record, loan receipt, and digital text log documenting years of their unregulated monetary demands against you, then draft state-certified legal paperwork establishing ironclad asset and support boundaries between you and your blood relatives. He laid out every tangible detail to prove this was no empty promise. The lawyer will schedule a formal mediated conference with your mother, father, and brother to walk them through North Carolina civil statutes stating adult siblings hold no legal obligation to fund one's business startups or daily living costs. We'll file an official certified notice to their residence. If they continue ambushing your workplace or private home to stage public financial shakedowns afterward, we will immediately initiate civil mediation and harassment claims, with all court and deposition costs covered entirely by me. This will put an end to the decades of guilt-tripping and forced sacrifice once and for all. This legal remedy struck the deepest, most persistent wound Ella carried. One lump sum of cash could only patch her studio's short-term cash shortage, but binding legal documentation would permanently sever the cycle of endless extortion she'd endured since her teenage years. The trade was no longer a one-sided rental of her identity for money. It balanced one evening of temporary cooperation with lifelong protection from her family's greed. She weighed the pros and cons in quiet contemplation, then lifted her gaze back to Hudson, voicing 3 non-negotiable ground rules to eliminate any risk of long-term entanglement beyond the single gala event. I will agree to stand in as your pretend wife for tonight's charity gala only if 3 non-negotiable rules are honored without exception. First, this arrangement expires the second the last guest departs the vineyard tonight. No private texts, calls, social media exchanges, or future joint appearances of any kind will be permitted afterward. We revert to total strangers when the night ends. Second, I will not perform exaggerated displays of fake affection to curry favor with your kin. If they press invasive questions about your estate and trust, I will answer plainly and honestly, with no softening of the truth to spare their egos. Third, the full legal consultation, evidence review, and boundary document drafting must kick off within 3 business days of this gala's close, and I will submit every record of their financial demands to your attorney at that scheduled meeting. Hudson pulled out his smartphone instantly, typing each rule word for word into his secure notes app to lock them in writing. He gave his unreserved verbal oath to uphold every term with no hidden loopholes or last-minute adjustments. The two quickly ironed out small details of how they'd interact and respond to questions throughout the auction and mingling hours. Ella turned to head back into the ballroom to finish auction rehearsal prep, leaving Hudson alone on the terrace to unpack the shift in perspective their conversation had sparked. A profound, genuine respect took root in his chest for this rare woman who valued self-worth far above any fortune a billionaire could offer, a stark contrast to every fortune-chasing social climber he'd crossed paths with over decades of elite society events. Twilight swallowed the entirety of the Sterling Vineyard grounds. Soft, warm amber lighting washed over every corner of the grand ballroom, and the live charity auction officially kicked off as guests filed neatly into their assigned seats. Hudson waited by the main ballroom entrance ahead of schedule. Once Ella wrapped all auction rehearsal checks, she walked over to fall in beside him, slowing her pace naturally to match his stride. She kept a gentle, comfortable distance between their bodies to sell the image of a quiet, devoted married pair, yet every gesture remained restrained and genuine, no over-the-top, forced displays of affection meant for show. The second they stepped fully into the main banquet space, every one of Hudson's siblings and scattered distant cousins snapped their heads toward the couple. Every pair of eyes carried unmasked scrutiny and quiet suspicion. They swept Ella's modest custom suit up and down from head to toe, silently theorizing her motives. Each relative had already settled on a single biased conclusion. She was a gold digger chasing the vineyard empire and multi-million-dollar trust fund, and they closed in fast, firing round after round of probing, loaded questions. Claire, Hudson's eldest sister, was the first to step forward. Her smile was hollow, performative and steeped in subtle condescension as her gaze lingered on Ella's mid-range designer suit, thinly veiling her judgment beneath polite small talk. "So this is the partner Hudson's mentioned? Forgive my curiosity. What line of work do you hold, and have you known him for years, or did you two only connect recently?" The unspoken subtext hung thick in the air. Claire was convinced Ella had latched onto Hudson out of nowhere just to get her hands on the family fortune. Ella's features stayed smooth and unruffled, not a flicker of nervousness crossing her face. She answered plainly, confident and unbowed, making no attempt to inflate her career or curry favor with the wealthy clan. "I'm an independent event planner. I designed and managed every detail of tonight's gala, and we first met last week when negotiating venue contracts for this vineyard event. Hudson and I each run our own separate businesses and hold individual personal assets. There's no reliance between us whatsoever." That single line, "we each hold independent personal assets," shattered Claire's pre-written narrative entirely. Her jaw tightened, her expression stiffening with embarrassment, and she scrambled to pivot to a meaningless, trivial subject, unable to come up with any valid counterargument. Tiffany, the second sister, stepped into Claire's place to take over the line of questioning. She shifted tactics to beat around the bush, bringing up the dozen vineyard estates and massive family trusts to fish for hints that Ella planned to claim a cut of the inheritance. "Hudson owns an extensive portfolio of vineyards, and the trust holds an incredible amount of wealth. Now that you two have settled into a steady partnership, I imagine you've gone over the family asset division plans. Have you considered co-managing the estate alongside him down the line?" Ella let out a faint, knowing little laugh, her reasoning sharp yet gracious as she dismantled Tiffany's greedy line of thinking on the spot. The Sterling family trust is Hudson's sole hereditary property, fully documented and legally designated as premarital assets. I have never entertained any thought of requesting shared ownership or a portion of the inheritance. Everyone ought to build their own wealth through their own career labor. Relying on splitting another family's generational savings is no sustainable way to build a life. Her unflinching honesty left Tiffany completely speechless, every pre-planned manipulative remark stuck in her throat. The surrounding crowd of distant aunts, uncles, and cousins stared on in open shock. None of them had ever met someone presented with access to the Sterling's vast fortune who showed zero envy and who would openly call out their collective greed without malice. An elderly distant paternal uncle pushed through the onlookers next, his tone dripping with patronizing judgment as he set out to trip her up. "Event planning strikes me as a narrow, modest trade. All our family's international retreats and annual elite summits will expect your attendance. Won't you feel wildly out of place among our circle?" Ella stood firm, unyielding yet poised, drawing on years coordinating galas for Charlotte's wealthiest landowners and multi-generational old money clans to respond with quiet self-assurance. "I've organized countless charity and corporate functions for the city's most prominent families for nearly a decade. I'm well-versed in all tiers of high society etiquette and conversational tact. That said, I will never pause my company's operations just to attend every family gathering. I'll only join events that don't conflict with my client deadlines, and I have no intention of abandoning my own business to attach myself to someone else's fortune." Her words laid her core stance crystal clear. She would never become a dependent appendage to a billionaire. Every probing, manipulative relative present lost the nerve to press her further. All their pre-planned tactics to wear Hudson down for asset splits fizzled out right then and there. Hudson stood half a step behind Ella the entire exchange, watching silently, his admiration growing deeper by the minute. Unlike every socialite who'd ever fawn over his wealth for an opening, Ella needed no fortune to back her confidence. She relied solely on her own sound logic and quiet dignity to shut down every hostile advance. During a lull between auction lots, a stream of local business owners wandered over to exchange pleasantries with the pair. All of them heaped praise on the flawless layout and seamless flow of the gala, and Ella spoke openly about her studio's charity-focused event concepts, never once bringing up Hudson's Vineyards or trust fund to elevate her own standing. Every conversation centered on her independent brand and community outreach projects. When the crowd thinned out briefly, Hudson leaned in to murmur a quiet contingency plan beside her ear. If any relative grew aggressive and demanded large chunks of the trust's revenue, he would step forward immediately to cut the conversation short and shield her from further harassment. Ella whispered a soft word of thanks. She fully understood the balance of their temporary agreement. He intended to follow through on the legal support to free her from her family's endless demands, and she would honor her end of the bargain for the rest of the night, no debts owed on either side. Midway through the auction program, a raucous commotion burst through the ballroom's main front entrance. The venue's security staff rushed to intervene, yet struggled to hold the group back. Ella glanced up, and a cold weight sank straight to the pit of her stomach. Her mother Martha, father Lyle, and deadbeat brother Braden shoved past uniformed ushers, cheap plastic gift bags clutched in their hands. They paid no mind to staff warnings, cutting a straight path through seated guests toward the auction podium where Ella and Hudson stood side by side. Greedy, calculating grins stretched across all three of their faces. Word had spread around town that Ella had befriended a billionaire, and they'd raced over that evening with every intention of making outrageous, six-figure financial demands to get rich quick off Hudson's wealth. Martha charged forward the second she spotted Ella and Hudson, completely oblivious to the hundreds of prominent socialites, doctors, and business leaders packed into the ballroom. She paid zero mind to the stunned, staring faces all around her, instantly slipping into a dramatic, tear-streaked performance designed to pull sympathy from the crowd. She hauled Braden forward by the arm, shoving him toward Hudson, and raised her voice loud enough to echo across the entire auction hall, laying out outrageous six-figure demands for every guest to overhear. Mr. Sterling, seeing as you're walking beside my daughter tonight, you're practically family to us now. Braden's used car dealership is only missing a big chunk of startup capital. Write a check for $30,000 USD straight up, buy him a storefront on downtown's main commercial strip, plus a fully equipped auto repair shop on the same lot. Once the lot turns a profit, our whole family will sing your praises forever. Lyle stepped right beside her, piling on even more absurd financial demands, his unbridled greed plain for every onlooker to read. It's not just the shop and lot, either. You need to purchase a full lakefront single-family home outright for Braden to use as a marital residence. 0 monthly mortgage payments. We've scraped by on pennies our whole lives, and all we've ever wanted is stability for our youngest son. You've got more wealth than you could ever spend, so this small expense ought to mean nothing to you. Braden leaned in without an ounce of shame or embarrassment, tossing out another costly ask as if Hudson owed him endless handouts. Also throw in a high-end off-road pickup truck for client test drives at the lot. Once my business blows up and I'm pulling steady revenue, I'll pitch in to help my sister out. It's just loose change for you. No reason to hesitate writing the check. A collective murmur rippled through the banquet hall at once. Every guest turned their heads to watch the spectacle unfold. No one could miss the family's shameless, brazen attempt to extort a billionaire right in front of the entire town's elite. The air thickened with awkward judgment as dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto Martha, Lyle, Braden, and the two people they were badgering. All the years of swallowed hurt, exhaustion, and powerlessness crashed over Ella in one crushing wave. Her hands clenched tight until her knuckles blanched white. Every bit of quiet dignity she'd clung to through years of quiet sacrifice crumbled away on this night, laid bare for Charlotte's most influential crowd to witness. She parted her lips to step between them and defuse the scene, but Martha cut her off before she could utter a single word, doubling down on emotional blackmail and scolding her for being cold and ungrateful. You've got a billionaire wrapped around your finger, and you refuse to lift a finger for your own brother? We raised you, fed you, gave you a roof your whole childhood, and this is how you repay us. If you won't ask him for the money, we're not leaving the spot until your conscience finally catches up to you. Hudson's siblings, aunts and uncles, lingered a short distance away, watching the whole confrontation with quiet, self-serving amusement. They sat back and waited to see if he'd cave under public pressure and foot the Reed family's massive debts. If he surrendered tens of thousands for Ella's kin, they figured they'd have perfect leverage to press him for their own trust fund cuts later on. Not a single Sterling relative stepped forward to calm the chaos or intervene. Ella's chest heaved, ready to break down and plead with her parents to stop making a spectacle of her, when Hudson stepped half a pace forward and planted himself solidly between her and the Reeds. His deep, resonant baritone cut clean over all the chattering and gasps filling the hall, sharp, steady and unyielding as he laid down non-negotiable lines for everyone to hear. First of all, Ella and I share only a temporary, one-night companionship for this gala. We hold no legal marital ties, so there is no joint property whatsoever between us. My vineyard holdings and multi-generational trust are separate premarital inherited assets, and I have zero legal or moral obligation to shell out $30,000 to buy storefronts, repair garages, lake houses, or vehicles for your son. I will not pay a single cent toward that absurd request. His gaze locked evenly on Martha, and Lyle as he laid out North Carolina's civil statutes, plainly to dismantle their warped sense of entitlement. State civil law is crystal clear on this point. Adult siblings carry no mandatory legal duty to cover each other's business startup costs or living expenses. Parents have no authority to force a grown daughter to drain her life savings to prop up an adult son's reckless ventures. 4 or 5 years straight you've pressured Ella into endless cash handouts, which amounts to a sustained pattern of financial exploitation. My family attorney will schedule a formal mediation session to go over every dollar trail of past payments and unending demands you've made against her. Second, a business's success or failure always hinges on the owner's planning, discipline, and work ethic, not handouts from strangers. Braden has quit every venture he's touched at the first hint of struggle, and every time he loses money his immediate reflex is to lean on his sister for bailouts. Even if I wrote him a blank check for commercial real estate, he'd mismanage the operation and burn through the funds in months, pure waste. I will not sink capital into a venture run without any sound long-term plan. Braden's face flushed hot with indignation, stepping forward to argue that Hudson was cheap and heartless for denying him his shot at success. But Hudson cut him off mid-sentence, without an ounce of compromise in his tone. You are fully capable of steady, full-time labor. Auto shops and warehouse yards all over this county have open, hourly positions available every week. The honest path to startup funds is clocking consistent shifts and saving your own earnings, not extorting your sister and demanding handouts from a stranger's generational wealth. Martha, seeing Hudson would not bend an inch, immediately dissolved into loud, performance sobs, throwing a theatrical fit in front of the crowd to turn public opinion against him and Ella. She wailed about ungrateful children and cruel rich men, as surrounding guests whispered critical judgments about her family's greed, their disgust plain on every face. Hudson did not flinch from her manufactured grief, maintaining composed, unshakable poise as he spelled out the full legal repercussions for their harassment for every onlooker to absorb. Within 3 business days, my attorney will mail certified formal legal notice to your residential address. If you continue ambushing Ella at her event studio or private home to stage public shakedowns and demand large sums of money, we will immediately file civil harassment claims with the county court. Every video recording, bank transfer record, and witness statement from tonight and past incidents will be submitted as official evidence in mediation and litigation. That single firm, evidence-backed statement shattered every delusional hope Martha, Lyle, and Braden had clung to of walking away with a windfall. Their histrionic begging froze mid-motion. All their grandstanding tactics fell flat, with no sympathetic audience left to manipulate. The Sterling relatives watching from the sidelines also quieted instantly, their own schemes to lobby for trust payouts fading fast. They now saw Hudson would never surrender his assets just to quiet public emotional pressure. Ella's rigid, tense shoulders softened as she stood behind him. For the first time in decades, she did not have to bear the full weight of her family's unfair demands alone. Someone stood beside her, armed with legal facts and unwavering resolve to block their endless exploitation. Uniformed venue security staff stepped forward gently to escort the 3 Reeds out of the ballroom. Martha shot Ella a venomous, resentful glare over her shoulder as she was led away, Braden's head hung low in bitter disappointment, and Lyle trudged along in total silence. The trio left the gala as the evening's biggest source of gossip, every guest whispering about their shameless public extortion long after they vanished through the front doors. Once order was restored to the auction program, Hudson leaned in to murmur quiet comfort to Ella, confirming that his legal team would reach out within 72 hours to compile every bank slip, loan record, and text log documenting years of her family's monetary demands. Ella whispered a quiet word of thanks, heavy sorrow mixed with quiet relief settling over her chest. She realized this temporary arrangement offered her far more than a one-time payout. It represented the single chance to break free from 30-odd years of unrelenting exploitation at the hands of her birth family. The charity gala wrapped up without a single hiccup. All proceeds from the silent and live auctions were fully transferred to the local Children's Medical Foundation. Every entrepreneur in attendance lined up to extend long-term collaboration offers to Ella, catapulting her event studio's reputation to the very top tier of Charlotte's elite social and corporate circle. Right after the last guest left the vineyard grounds, Hudson wired the full $15,000 lump sum directly to Ella's business bank account, fulfilling every monetary commitment they had agreed upon. He also sent over his trusted family attorney's contact information and scheduled consultation window, scheduling a formal meeting 3 days later to sort through all her financial records and supporting evidence. The two exchanged brief goodbyes out on the vineyard's rear terrace. They stuck rigidly to their verbal agreement. Once the gala ended, they would revert to ordinary acquaintances with no personal ties. They did not swap private cell numbers, only sharing a professional work email address to coordinate paperwork with the lawyer. Though their one-night temporary partnership had come to an official close, this unusual encounter had forced both of them to see the unmasked greed lurking within their respective family circles. Each made life-altering decisions that broke free from decades of manipulative familial pressure, finally grasping full autonomy over their own futures. First came the profound shift in Ella's life. 3 days later, she sat down with the attorney, handing over 5 full years' worth of bank statements, transfer screenshots, and text message logs documenting every cash gift and loan she'd given to Braden and covered household expenses for her parents. Drawing on North Carolina civil statutes, the lawyer drafted a legally binding formal notice outlining clear financial boundaries between Ella and her blood relatives. The document explicitly stated that Ella bore no legal obligation to fund Braden's business startups, home purchases, or vehicle costs, limiting her voluntary yearly assistance only to small holiday cash gifts with 0 mandatory large-sum payments. The attorney accompanied Ella to a mediated meeting with Martha and Lyle, plus Braden, reading every clause of the official notice aloud and walking them through civil liability for ongoing financial harassment. Martha still tried to manipulate Ella with tales of all the sacrifices made to raise her. Elle resorted to theatrical displays of sorrow to fish for sympathy. Braden flew into a rage, calling his sister cold and ungrateful. But the lawyer dismantled every one of their manipulative arguments point by point, citing state law with 0 room for compromise. 4 signed copies of the legal notice were filed with the county clerk's office. If the 3 ever again blocked the entrance to Ella's studio or private residence, or staged public demands for money, Ella could immediately submit all accumulated evidence and file a civil lawsuit seeking compensation for emotional distress. That single legal document permanently severed the years-long cycle of financial leeching that had drained Ella's finances and mental energy for over half a decade. In the months that followed, Martha and Lyle would occasionally call to test whether Ella would cave to small requests. The second the conversation turned to large sums for business ventures or real estate, Ella hung up the phone without hesitation, holding firm to the legal boundaries she had secured. Cut off from the steady stream of cash Ella had once provided, Braden had no choice but to take a full-time permanent position at a local auto repair shop. He showed up to work 9 to 5 every day, abandoning all his half-baked, get-rich-quick business schemes. Yet resentment lingered in his heart. He never reflected on his own laziness and endless sense of entitlement. Deprived of their daughter's consistent financial support, the elderly couple's household budget shrank drastically. Neighbors who knew the full story behind their decades of exploitation gradually pulled away from them at community gatherings. Trapped living solely on meager state retirement benefits, they watched Ella's business flourish and her quiet, independent life take shape, consumed by constant regret. But they had forfeited every right to ask for more, doomed to spend their golden years haunted by the consequences of their own avarice. Parallel life-altering changes unfolded for Hudson. The brazen, unfiltered greed displayed by his siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins at the gala laid bare the harsh truth. None of them cared about him as a person, their every thought fixated solely on his vineyard holdings and multi-generational trust fund. First thing the next morning, he visited his estate attorney's office to overhaul every profit distribution clause, written into the decades-old family trust. The revised legal documents contain ironclad new provisions. All annual vineyard operating revenue and inherited assets fell solely under Hudson's unilateral control. No sibling, cousin, aunt, or uncle, regardless of marital status or number of children, could submit petitions to split or advance trust funds. Only Hudson's future biological children would hold legal inheritance rights. Every extended family member was removed entirely from the profit-sharing list, with no temporary disbursements available to kin of any generation. Copies of the amended trust were mailed out to every relative's home address within 48 hours. En masse, they descended on Hudson's main vineyard office to beg him to reverse the revisions, bombarding him with emotional pleas and generational guilt trips. Hudson shut down every appeal without exception, laying out all their selfish demands from the charity gala for everyone present to hear. He drastically cut back attendance at tedious family dinners and elite social mixers filled with scheming relatives, pouring more time into expanding public fruit-picking community programs and pediatric medical charity collaborations. Deprived of any legal avenue to siphon off Hudson's wealth, every relative's grand plans for luxury homes and private school tuition collapsed completely. They turned on one another, bickering endlessly over lost opportunities for easy money, fracturing the unified front they had once maintained to pressure Hudson. Left with no choice, each kin had to rely solely on their own ordinary day jobs, complaining nonstop yet powerless to alter the new trust rules. Freed from years of exhausting familial harassment, Hudson streamlined his vineyard development plans. He maintained only strictly professional, quarterly charity event partnerships with Ella's studio. The two remained close, like-minded confidants who respected each other deeply, yet never pursued a romantic relationship, preserving full independence in their separate lives. Ella shed both the financial strain and persistent mental torment inflicted by her birth family. Her event booking calendar stayed packed year-round, and her personal savings grew steadily. She purchased a quiet, standalone townhouse on the outskirts of Charlotte, a space fully and unconditionally hers, safe from unannounced intrusions and monetary demands. In her free time, she tended fruit shrubs in her private backyard and drafted pro bono charity event blueprints for low-income community groups. No longer did she lie awake at night agonizing over her brother's reckless schemes or her parents' relentless criticism. For the first time in her adult life, she found unhurried, genuine peace, learning a hard, vital lesson. Kindness without firm boundaries is self-destruction, and one must never sacrifice their own happiness to appease selfish blood relatives. With his restructured trust and stable vineyard enterprise, Hudson no longer wasted energy fielding endless greedy appeals from his kin. He pared down his social circle to only sincere friends who valued him for his character, not his fortune. He came to realize that even hundreds of millions in assets could never buy genuine familial affection or unselfish loyalty. Material wealth paled in comparison to the power to shape one's own life choices. Word of the dual reckoning sparked by that medical charity gala spread far and wide across Charlotte's suburban valley. Middle-aged and elderly local residents often recounted the tale at community markets and church gatherings, struck by how closely it mirrored real life. The core takeaway echoed through every conversation. Constant compromise only emboldens endless exploitation. Money cannot buy genuine devotion. Whether you are a small business owner or a multimillionaire, only by drawing clear financial and emotional lines with family can you claim command over your own fate. Every person driven by greed and calculation will ultimately walk away empty-handed, forced to carry lifelong regret for their own choices.